Hey, this is Christian Buckley with another MVP Buzz Chat, and I'm here with Dr. John White, philanthropist, world traveler, mad scientist, and John.
I'm not mad. I'm just angry.
Why don't you introduce yourself?
I do have an MSc, so that makes me a scientist, I think. Yes.
Is that all you have to be made, classified as a scientist? That's it?
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
Okay.
So yeah, let me try.
Well, you know, like Big Bang Theory, they always make fun of the guy with just the master's degrees.
Yeah, I know. It wasn't cost effective to go get a doctorate. Plus, I'm impatient. You know me.
Yeah. I have the exact same story. I think there is no somebody argue with me that there's no financial justification for that. So I do want to go get my doctorate.
It's negative.
Yeah, I do want to go get the doctorate. But you know, that's more of a semi-retirement thing.
Once you're independently wealthy, yeah.
Right. Correct.
I'm still working on that at my age.
Well, why don't you introduce yourself, John?
I'm John White. I'm the CTO and co-founder of the company's name is UnlimitedViz. We are the makers of tyGraph. So if you've heard of us, that's probably why you've heard of us. We do analytical software for Office 365. Well, you know some of the background. I've been in this industry far too long. I think I broke in with Novell, actually, Novell NetWare.
Nice.
Yeah, absolutely. Came up through the ranks with Lotus Notes, did some dabbling with Java, JavaScript, landed in the Microsoft space with SharePoint 2001, believe it or not, and just focused in on the business intelligence area. And in the last few years, as business intelligence has moved off of SharePoint as a platform, I'm focusing in on Power BI these days.
Well, it's interesting. So I'm not old school like you. I got introduced into the SharePoint world in the 2003 era.
Wow. Hey,
I'm part of the young kids that came in later. Yeah. But it is interesting. I mean, there's been a lot of talk for years, the SharePoint space about, you know, all the data, and then there's the presentation layer.
Yeah.
It feels like we're finally getting to that space. I mean, we had that conversation a lot with Teams, where Teams is really just about the consuming of information and through applications, and, you know, through all of these other tools, and your data could be in SharePoint and OneDrive, which is SharePoint, but you know, accessing other legacy applications and data stores all over the place.
It's the whole dream of loosely coupled systems, right? I mean, Teams is an excellent example. But Teams really, if you dig under the covers, all Teams is the chat mechanism, right? That's really all it's truly bringing to the table, apart from that integrating platform, that UI, that basically has lit up. And frankly, in the data space, that's what Power BI is, right? I mean, it's got tech. What's beautiful about Power BI is, for years and years and years, Microsoft had some really strong BI technology, server wise, but had zero, frankly. Well, not zero, but it was next to zero unless you were, you know, a fairly advanced analyst on the client side. And Power BI is bringing some quite usable interfaces, essentially, or they're democratizing BI is what they're doing, and they're aggregating data where it sits, so you don't have to worry about bringing things, you know, one time over a massive BI project. It's kind of the same sort of vision on the data side.
Well, you know, so Microsoft has long had been in the pole position in two categories. I mean, a lot of spaces are handling a lot of things, but in two categories that they've not quite taken ownership of yet, but they still have the ability. And so one, I mean, my background being first of my career as a technical project manager and program management, and I would build out PMOs for organizations, was the project and portfolio management. And you think Microsoft Project and Project Server and their long history, and they still don't own the space. It is just diffused across. And I would argue that there's a movement towards with all of the common data system and like all these other systems, the data that's being collected now, the push behind Planner and of course Project 365, and you have all these tools that are still out there, and yet Excel is still the #1 project management tool. You know, but
it's ease of use, right? I mean, I think Project the server and all of that is you know, sits on top of SharePoint. And I think the lesson that's the lesson that's been learned over the past few years is you don't want to make anything totally dependent on SharePoint. SharePoint's an awesome tool, but it's not necessarily the most user-friendly in every single case, certainly not for point solutions, right? And by moving things away, well, again, Teams is kind of winning on that UI space, but really the power of Teams is SharePoint and behind the scenes.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
but that's just the one piece.
Yeah,
it has those commonalities, and the second one where Microsoft is in that pole position is around the analytics, is that side of it too, where again we default to, you can throw in there talking about Excel or Excel, of course, highly used. Microsoft has been in the space for a number of years.
Yeah.
With Power BI and Excel. I mean, there's meteor capabilities within Excel itself. Microsoft really is, as you say, they are in that position to democratize the analytics capability.
They're owning it, and if you see some of the market movement in the last few years, it's really come to fruition. I mean, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but they're of course growing at ridiculous rates. They've been, upper right-hand corner of the Gartner Magic Quadrant for the last 10 years. Or maybe it's not that, but it's certainly been as long as Power BI has been in market. And one of the most recent things that is telling me that they're winning the battle essentially is that Tableau just got bought by Salesforce. So, Tableau becomes, Salesforce gets a great analytical tool, but Microsoft loses a competitor, frankly. That's what they're going to be focused on Salesforce from now on. And that's basically them saying, I think we need to exit the market now while the getting's good. Power BI has been coming up. I mean, initially it was the scrappy contender that was priced right. Now it's, very, very feature rich. And yeah, it's really democratizing the BI space. And as you mentioned, you could use Excel as well. Excel is still very much a first-class citizen in the Power BI space. But you notice, a few years back, before we had the new UI on Power BI, the one that's about 4 or 5 years old now, the first time they gave that a shot was, let's just make Excel the BI client because everybody exports to Excel. That didn't quite fly either. It didn't exactly take off, and that part of that is usability. They've really gotten it to the space where I want to say simple users, basic users, end users are comfortable with the tools.
Well, you also have the movement towards like the open data. So the open data initiative. So it's Microsoft, Adobe, SAP. I mean, it's a different approach to a lot of these things. So at the Microsoft Inspire, I spent some time over in the product team kiosks over in the sales and marketing side of things. And it was less about what they're doing, the front end, the application itself, because right now Microsoft's not even on the radar in some of those areas. It's like CRM. Everybody thinks of Dynamics as CRM. It's just one little piece of what Dynamics is and does within the space. Much smaller piece would be the ERP piece, but but with all of that out there, it's funny as I would kind of go back to the interface, and the Microsoft product managers there, the floor would just keep saying, it's like, look, it's irrelevant, that piece of it. Wherever your data is, there's no company that has like all Microsoft technology. We only look through and view these front end applications that are Microsoft developed, and so the story is really the ownership of all of these other systems. And so that's why you see Microsoft stressing the platform, ODI, the common data services, the sharing of information across these things. Because the reality is that organizations want a multi-cloud, multi-platform, multi-OEM approach to go and build quickly and easily and scalable, manageable across all these different assets. You want all those different pieces. And I mean, we're just now getting to this fun space where we can start doing some of those things.
We really are, and it's a convergence of a number of technologies. You mentioned the Open Data Initiative. Part of how that's being accomplished is through things like, well, you mentioned Common Data Service. There's different, those are all instances of the Common Data Model. Right. And it's basically the way you can abstract out the metadata for whatever the object you're talking about. So I have a customer. Is my customer stored in CRM? Is it stored in Salesforce? Whatever. It doesn't matter. It's going to have these fields in common. Both of those products are obviously structured differently. They have different schemas. And the simple idea behind all of that stuff is let's have a layer that's above all of that stuff. We'll have all of our integration stuff talk to that layer, and those things will plug into it. So if I have CRM, I plug my CRM into this model. If I have Salesforce, I plug that into the model. Whatever those object types are. In Power BI, these are manifested as data flows. So there's different ways of attacking this. But at the end of the day, it's just files in a data lake in Azure.
It's interesting as I started to really kind of, because look, I started my career in the data warehousing world, and working for, I was in Pacific Telsis Shared Services, so the phone company, Pacific Bell in California, and I was with the parent company in a shared services organization. And so some of my first.
So you were the guy who never showed up for his appointments on time?
No. I was the one. I was running the like I did a data center consolidation project that was a year and a half to go and do, where we're updating the old and I wish I still had it, like the old SGI hardware. Those were awesome.
Wow. Irises.
Yeah. We were moving off of those over to HP, and so just less expensive, easier to kind of support and stuff. And at the same time, we were rolling out front-end applications. So business objects. I don't know if you remember DSS Strategy, the company. They had a product called DSS Agent. I was a huge fan. Yeah, business objects won the battle there. But SaaS and a bunch of their modules and things like that. And so I represented kind of all those pieces. But increasingly, the projects that I would work on were to go and grab these other data sources and merge this stuff in. And so every other project just became this kind of a rinse repeat of that process. We want to update with this GIS information. We want to, sorry folks, geographical information system. So the phone company, when they go and dig a trench in your yard, they want to be accurate within 3 feet, not 30 feet.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea.
Yeah, not dig up your whole yard looking for that thing. So we're constantly updating that. And then, a lot of this other demographic, psychographic information. So that was, we'd go and run campaigns and market to, back in the old day, why they even need to do that kind of marketing when if you wanted to hook up your phone, there was one phone number to call,
Yeah.
But anyway, it's just fascinating, even back then, to how painful that was to go and make a lot of that data usable, manageable, so that these front-end applications could successfully navigate it, much less pull out subsets of this data. It was excruciating to do that. We had no cloud to go and leverage,
and that's really made a massive difference. Yeah. Someone who can manage that data, make sure it's reliable, make sure it's there. And I mean, it's I want to say a vicious cycle. It might be a virtuous cycle. Depends on how you look at it. But the easier we make it to be able to store this data reliably, to be able to leverage the insights that are available in that data, that's more motivation to put more data in. So as we add more, we get more value out, et cetera, et cetera. So this is just it's snowballing.
Well, what are some of the, as you talk with clients a lot about this, you're going and building a lot of these models, you're helping train them on how to use the solutions themselves. Like, what are the kinds of things that people are doing with this data? Because we would, several years ago, the cloud branding of, we're moving to the cloud, and on-prem was still 80+% of what was out there, even 5 years ago, 6 years ago. We would talk about the fact that organizations aren't getting rid of data anymore. And part of it is this fear that, hey, we want to store it. We don't know what value we can get out of it today, but we don't want to purge it and then find out, hey, we could have gotten these other uses of it.
Oh, they do if there's potential liability sitting there.
Yeah, but I would even argue that most organizations, they're not aware enough of what they have to do that kind of purging. They should be, yes. So what kinds of things are organizations doing? What kinds of problems are you addressing for them?
Well, for the most part, it's the classic things, right? We want to know, we want answers to the questions. And we've always had that situation where we know what questions we have, right? So basic green bar reports have always been able to answer that. That requirement is still there, right? We always are going to have that one moving forward. Now we've gotten with some of the more analytical tools and the self-service BI, and that's where you get into things like Power Pivot. That goes back, I guess, 10 years or so. Now we can start to answer questions that we didn't know we have already. So that's, analytical reporting. We can drill around in the data. Why is that point so high? Start to answer those questions as an end user, as opposed to having to go out and have IT build all these reports. So that starts to be good. But, we get the sheer volume of data. What happens next? You know what? I don't want to be bothered with the reports and looking around in my data. I want you to tell me when I need to be concerned. And that's when we start to leverage off some of this machine learning stuff. So it's not just a buzzword. We have all of this data. It's in the cloud, so we can share it amongst users. This is something Microsoft does when they're training their models. We get the benefit of the trained models, not the data underlying. So that's good. So they have this massive pool of data they can draw upon to train their models. But if I've got models specific to my business, I can start to leverage the data I've collected to build some predictive analytics. So tell me when things are outside of the norm, when something is an outlier. And there are lots of tools for doing that. There's tools for common scenarios that are just, plug in your data. There are tools that, there are models that are already built by Microsoft just pointed at your data, right? So you can use your data to train it. And then finally, if none of those exist, there's some really, really cool tools now that help you just build your own models. So there's, Azure ML Studio that's out there that can run right off your data. But even Power BI has added just recently some ML capabilities where I can have a pool of data. Let's say I've got a bunch of dimensions. I'd like to be able to predict this measure, whether it's a turn down a loan application, or I should say accept a loan application. Be positive, John. Or predict a number in the future. Well, I could have it run through all my data. It will internally build a model that I can now run against other data and have it predict what my values are. And I can take that model and export it to Azure and make it part of an application. So these are some of the things you can do with data when you have large amounts of it stored.
But I guess the fear is for a lot of organizations, like, do I need to go hire a data scientist to be able to navigate through all of that? Or is it something that, a business analyst, somebody that understands the systems and to some degree, the data that's being captured and what's out there, and then to go and start, formulating this? Or do I need to go hire a consultant? I know you can't entirely say no to that, John, because you get one.
We're a software company now, man. We're a software company.
You guys don't do that either. You're a software company. But I mean, but do I need to go hire a third party to be able to go and build all that? Or is that something that I really, truthfully can do on my own?
Well, democratizing something like the machine learning is kind of the next step. We've got BI democratized, or we're well on our way. So let's worry about democratizing. And what that is, there's always going to be the place for the data scientist, right? You always want to make sure that you've got someone to answer those really, really tough questions. What this tooling, huh?
I always just use it as an example. Like I had a buddy who ran musician, ran the digital studios at his university, did his master's degree in music composition. And I went over to his home studio and he had Cakewalk, if you're familiar with that.
Yeah.
He had all set up, and he left me alone. He's off working. I was visiting from out of state, and I'm playing all day long. I'm creating, I'm doing all this kind of stuff.
Excellent analogy.
I'm awesome at this. Then I purchased Cakewalk, installed it on my home system, and I'm like completely lost. He had fine-tuned everything set up. That's how I look at this. Like,
but it's a good analogy, because if you look at what I'm saying, the democratization of this or any other tool is you're taking the parts that are repeatable out, or the parts that are, you can make approachable, and you're giving them to the end users. And you're still going to need your data science, but they're not going to have to do everything related to it. It's not a gargantuan task to start getting into it. You can go to them now after you're quite a ways down the road, if you still can't solve your problem, with a pretty well-informed question is what it boils down to. And to your analogy, to make music, you used to have to rent a studio. It cost, I don't know how much. You had to go in, all this hardware sitting there. And now you can get software and run it on your computer and not know what you're doing, and start putting stuff out there. Now, you want to be a musician to have good stuff.
You subscribe to a service that has all of that already out there in the cloud.
Yeah.
Whether it is as responsive as you want, that's another question.
Yeah. But it's that concept of democratization in all these spaces. And frankly, that's what Microsoft has always been good at. If I go back in my history, they democratized networking. Novell was good, but it wasn't as approachable. So boom, everybody attacked, everybody latched onto Microsoft's network. word processing, right? Document management. The one thing, if I had to pick one thing that SharePoint had a massive impact on, is it democratized document management. Before SharePoint, Documentum, right? All of those guys. And that was, big stuff that you needed training on, and it was hard to use. SharePoint came along, made it relatively easy. And, with OneDrive, it's even easier these days. But it's this whole democratization process, and that's what they've been good at, and they're doing that here.
Well, so where do you recommend organizations go get started in what they do? I know that you kind of, you preach the religion of Power BI that's out there, that's right. And I've gone to a couple of workshops, and that's one of those things where you open it up and the interface might be, less than helpful of like, where do I actually start?
Sure.
Nothing about that. But once you get kind of the main components and know how to navigate the primary functions of it, you can start to get going and learn some things. But kind of where do you set people on that path to kind of learn?
Walk before you run. There's a bunch of tools that come right with it. So to start with, you can get up and running. If you've got an Azure Active Directory account, just go to app.powerbi.com, punch in your AAD credentials, and you'll be up and running as a free user. As a free user, by the way, you can do everything in the service that doesn't involve sharing. All right, just to be aware of that. So you can completely get yourself ramped up on working with data and all of that, building data models, et cetera, et cetera. In that service, in the upper right-hand corner, there's a little question mark icon. It's for help. And right under there, there is a link to a whole pile of bite-sized videos. So that's one place to start. There's a site out there called edX.com. There is a whole course on Power BI if you want to walk through it, built by one of the product team members. Will Thompson is his name. There are seminars out there. There are dashboard in a day courses that are being offered out there. All kinds of good stuff on that front. On YouTube, there's a channel called Guy in a Cube, done by Adam Saxton and Patrick LeBlanc from the Power BI CAT team. Fantastic stuff. They put out, I think it's 2, but it might be 4 episodes a week, with little bite-sized chunks of coming up to speed with Power BI. And for our end, Jason Himmelstein and I do a podcast weekly that keeps up on the news, what's happening in the Power BI space. We do news, or we do interviews typically with either product team members or community members. So those are a few areas that you can get up and running on this stuff.
Yeah, I have to say that we had our SQL Saturday event here a few weeks back, and the 2 sources that were quoted a couple times during, and pointers that links to in one of the presentations, but it was your podcast, the 2 of you, and the 2 guys at the Cube as well. So those 2 resources are very, very popular. But
yeah, it's Guy in a Cube, but there's 2 guys, so we still haven't figured that out yet.
Yeah. Well, it's I'll have to provide those links out as well as part of the blog post that goes along eventually with all of these.
Mm-hmm.
But John, people want to find out more about you. How do they get in touch? What's the best way to reach you?
Well, just search my name. It's very uncommon. It's hard to find online. No. I'm at I have a blog at whitepages.unlimitedviz.org. That's V as in Victor, IZ, not Z. I'm Canadian, remember. That's a good way to go. On Twitter, I'm at DiverDown1964. Let's come back to my name as to why I have a weird Twitter handle. But John White was taken. Let's just leave it at that.
Yeah. Shocking.
And the company, if you're interested in the product stuff that we do, is tygraph.com.
Yeah, tyGraph, pretty known. That's out there. I don't know, kind of biased. I guess I have to point this out there. I work with tyGraph, so about the marketing side of stuff, but
a little bit.
You guys have clients all over the place. You guys, tyGraph is all over Microsoft, and
we sponsor CollabTalk.
That's right. So the tweet jams that we just held, and
we've got a Twitter report for just about any community event that's going on. Anybody who asks, anyway.
Yeah, that's cool stuff. Well, John, really appreciate your time today. Thanks a lot for joining me for this MVP Buzz Chat.
Always a pleasure talking to Christian.
I'll talk to you soon.
All right.